Well, folks, here it is, the final review for Onyxia's Lair. 2 legendary cards this time around, including up first here, Raid Boss Onyxia. I love that that's actually just the name of the card. It's kind of hilarious. This is a 10 mana 8/8 dragon, of course, and quite a few things going on here. Onyxia has Rush. Onyxia is also immune while you control a whelp. So we've seen a few different whelp summoning cards that can play into that. Also, Battle Cry summons 6 2/1 whelps with Rush. So also she's going to summon a big old board of whelps as well. Now this card's interesting, right? Essentially, you're creating this kind of dilemma for your opponent where it's like, man, I really need to kill this 8/8 because it's a big threat on board, but then I got to get through all these whelps first. Maybe that's not easy for them to do, and then they're kind of stuck leaving this 8/8 behind. Also, the immune doesn't even really have to stick around because it's just like you're going to have those whelps immediately. The 8/8's going to get a good trade no matter what because it's going to be immune. So as long as there's something pretty sizable on board to hit, Onyxia takes a great trade. The whelps clean up the rest. So this card has a lot more reactive utility than we typically see for a big, like, high cost threat. And it's actually a threat that's left behind on board. So that does make it a little more intriguing for me than the average 10 mana card. I could envision some control decks using this as a board clear, essentially, that leaves behind a lot of stuff on board that can be, a nice little counter pressure push. So, it's still 10 mana. That's still awfully expensive. Not every deck's going to be able to afford to do that. Also, not a perfect fit for things like big decks necessarily, because you probably want to get the battle cry out of this to really best utilize the immune. But, we saw like Druid get that wide board whelp summon on top of this. You could see like a bigger, rampier Druid deck using all of these different Onyxia pieces to some success. And then, of course, formats like Arena, Onyxia looks insane, just like a ridiculous board clear that leaves behind a giant threat. In Standard, I think it's going to be a very limited pool of decks that are best able to utilize this, just because not that many decks can really afford to run 10 drops consistently. But I do think she has that speed and reactivity we often demand from high cost cards because of all these different effects bundled together. I mean, essentially here you're getting like 20 damage in removal out of this with some minions left behind. I don't know how often Onyxia's gonna stick around for multiple turns to be like this crazy, onboard repeating threat that's immune forever. That seems a little tough, but just that one-time play, this is still going to be a rather impactful swing. So yeah, I think there's actually a chance some greedier control decks might actually make this one work. All right, so next up here is Hala Matron Protectorate for Mage, a new legendary card. 8 mana 4/12 dragon, and it reads, after you cast a spell, deal 4 damage randomly split among all enemies. If that text sounds familiar, that's because it is essentially Flamewaker's text of old, just 4 damage instead of 2. So, in theory, this is a bigger, scarier Flamewaker that deals twice as much damage. And of course, Flamewaker back in the day was a very powerful card, did some spammy, terrible feel bad stuff, just murdering people, especially in wild format. More recently, some of the spam mages have gone nuts with like Flamewaker OTKs and stuff. But the big difference, of course, is that this is 8 mana instead of 3 mana. And that means both that you have to play this later in a game, but also you don't have as much spare mana left over. And I think that makes Hala really, really weak. And yes, of course, Mage can discount a ton of spells and cycle through those spells pretty affordably, like we've seen with Mozaki, but this has a way lower payoff than something like Mozaki, for instance. So you're going to need just some miraculously perfect turn to kind of turn this into that Mozaki payoff or Flamewaker payoff of old, which I just don't see that happening. Like, it's just too much commitment, it takes too long, it's a one-of, so it might be hard to find. There are all these sort of problems. The only way I see Hala making any sense is through some kind of like cheese mechanic where it's discounted heavily, or generated through something else, maybe even in other classes. Obviously something like, Druid randomly summoning this off a Cenarian Ward and like having a few spells could be like this crazy swing turn, right? And, getting a 1 mana version of this off Lady Prester or something could be another like cheese way to do it. But as far as like actually hard committing to running this in a deck, I just don't see how it's ever competitive or strong enough. It's got a big effect, so there's like that tiny possibility, but it seems so incredibly unlikely. That said, you know, a card like this existing, being around for summons and discovers and randomly generated moments will be influential. There will be moments this comes into a game and has a major impact, and perhaps even a frustrating impact on occasion, just like, oh, I just took 16 randomly, great. So it's important for cards like this to exist. It just won't be played in a deck list. And I didn't even acknowledge Drake Fire Amulet. I guess I should, as a way to like summon this for Mage, because that's the 10 mana spell, gets you a big dragon. Like, yes, this is in that pool. I don't think that makes Drake Fire Amulet good. I don't think that's a relevant, you know, bump to Drake Fire Amulet, nor of course does that substantiate running this card in a deck either. They don't really help each other, I don't think, all that much. They're still just both very slow and expensive cards. So now let's do some quick reviews. Raid Boss Onyxia is a 4-star card. Hala Matron Protectorate is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for Onyxia's Lair. A lot of stuff to goof around with. Kazakhstan in particular seems like he's going to be stupidly fun to goof around with. So on Tuesday, February 15th, I will be streaming all day playing all these cards. Stay tuned for lots of videos and gameplay and cool moments of all that stuff. Thanks for joining me as always for these card reviews. And until next time, game on.